When the message arrived at the Starseeker, Miriam Salas was recording her daily log. The transmission cut through the silence of her quarters like a razor through silk, fragmented, desperate, and unmistakably a child's voice. "Mother? Where are you, Mother?" The shadows are eating the light again. Miriam's hand froze above the console. Something in that voice penetrated deeper than sound should travel. For a flicker of a moment, she thought she smelled ash and felt cold stone beneath her fingers instead of the metallic surface of her desk. "Commander," the ship's AI announced with customary precision, "we have intercepted an unauthorized transmission originating from Virion. Shall I discard as per Galactic Council Directive 478B?" Miriam closed her eyes. Directive 478B. Non-interference with designated quarantine zones. Virion had been under that designation for nearly 15 Earth years now. Once the biological and cultural center of the virilized species, a gentle civilization known for their memory preservation technologies and crystalline architecture, the planet had fallen silent almost overnight. The official reports cited a catastrophic environmental collapse. The unofficial whispers among the scout ships mentioned screams that continued long after communication channels went dead. "Play it again," she commanded, standing and moving toward the curved viewport that revealed the distant smudge of bluish light that was Virion. "Mother? Where are you, Mother?" The shadows are eating the light again. Static crackled between words, giving them an eerie, disconnected quality. Then, in the background, something that might have been wailing or wind or neither. "How long has this been broadcasting?" "The signal has been repeating for approximately 7 galactic standard months," the AI, Lyra, responded. "It was classified as ambient radiation and filtered from regular communication bands by Council intelligence. 7 months. 7 months of a child calling for its mother while the greatest powers in the galaxy deliberately tuned out the frequency. "Commander," Lyra continued with that slightly hesitant tone that Miriam had come to recognize as the AI processing conflicting protocols, "I must remind you that Virion possesses no strategic value to human expansion interests. The Galactic Council has specifically advised." "The Council advised," Miriam interrupted, touching the small pendant at her neck, a caduceus, symbol of her former life as a military physician before her promotion to command. "They didn't order." She turned from the viewport, decision already crystallizing. "Lyra, set course for Virion. Alert the crew to prepare for potential biohazard protocols. And open a channel to Council headquarters." A pause. "Commander Salas, I am obligated to inform you that this action may be interpreted as a violation of—" "I know exactly what it may be interpreted as," Miriam said quietly. "Open the channel, Lyra." As the communications system initialized, Miriam thought of the message being sent to the lofty chambers of the Galactic Council. Those ancient species who had watched civilizations rise and fall like tides, who measured value in millennia and resources rather than lives. The humans, barely 2 centuries into faster-than-light travel, were still considered impulsive children in their eyes. Perhaps they were right. In the depths of the Galactic Council's monitoring station, the alert signifying the Starseeker's course change flashed across multiple screens. Senior Administrator Thaxu, a tall, gray-skinned being with compound eyes that reflected the console lights like fractured galaxies, gazed impassively at the trajectory. "The humans are diverting to Virion," they noted, multi-jointed fingers tapping a complex rhythm on the control panel. Beside them, Ambassador Krythos, representative of the Varangian Collective, released a sound approximating a sigh. Was it not inevitable? Their species consistently prioritizes emotional impulse over rational assessment. "Should we intercept?" asked a junior administrator, mandibles clicking with uncertainty. Thaxu considered this for precisely 3 seconds, an eternity in their species' thought patterns. "No, monitor from a distance. The situation presents an opportunity to observe human intervention dynamics in controlled conditions. And if they discover what was left behind?" Krythos inquired. "Ensure they do not become symbols," Thaxu replied, 8 eyes blinking in sequence. The greater species of the galaxy require stability, not idealism. Make this clear to all monitoring stations. As the administrators dispersed, none noticed the small light blinking on a forgotten console, a backup system running in ancient protocol. On its screen flashed a single message: memory containment integrity, critical failure imminent. The Star Seeker dropped out of hyperspace at a cautious distance from Virion, and the first visual scans painted a bleak portrait. Once renowned for its sprawling crystalline cities that captured and refracted the light of its twin suns, the planet now appeared shrouded in swirling cloud formations the color of old bruises. Occasional lightning strikes illuminated the atmosphere, revealing glimpses of the surface, twisted spires, collapsed domes, and vast expanses of what might have been forests now contorted into shapes that defied natural growth patterns. On the bridge, Miriam stood with her hands clasped behind her back, shoulders straight, the posture of a commander making a difficult decision look certain. "Initial atmospheric readings, Lieutenant Vega," she requested. The young officer's fingers danced across his console. "Breathable, ma'am, but only just high concentrations of particulate matter, unusual electromagnetic disturbances, and," he paused, brow furrowing, "what appears to be organic compounds suspended in the upper atmosphere. Unlike anything in our databases. Life signs, scattered, weak, concentrated primarily beneath the surface in what appear to be shielded enclaves." The science officer, Dr. Wren, stepped forward, her typically pragmatic expression betraying a hint of concern. "Commander, I must emphasize that these readings could indicate survivors experiencing severe physiological distress, or merely automated systems maintaining the illusion of life signs." A silence settled over the bridge, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Was this mission already futile? "Prepare the landing shuttle," Miriam ordered, breaking the moment. "Environmental suits for all ground team members. Dr. Wren, you'll accompany me along with Lieutenants Vega and Mariko." "Commander," Dr. Wren's voice lowered, meant for Miriam alone, "I feel obligated to remind you that Council protocol for potentially compromised worlds strongly recommends remote assessment for a minimum of 72 hours before physical contact." Miriam met the scientist's gaze evenly. "And how many children's distress calls have gone unanswered during those standard 72 hours, Doctor?" Dr. Wren inhaled sharply but offered no counterargument. As the preparations for landing commenced, Miriam returned to her quarters briefly. She accessed her private terminal and recorded a simple message. "To Earth Command, Star Seeker has diverted to Virion to investigate potential survivors and ongoing distress signals. This action was taken under my sole authority as commander. Any consequences should fall on me alone." She hesitated, then added, "Some duties transcend orders." The descent through Virion's atmosphere was turbulent, the shuttle shuddering as it passed through layers of the strange particulate clouds. Through the viewport, the landscape came into clearer focus, and the devastation was even more pronounced than the orbital scans had suggested. The crystalline cities for which the Virili were known now stood like shattered teeth against the horizon, once transparent structures clouded and cracked. The famous gardens that had housed botanical specimens from across the galaxy were unrecognizable, transformed into tangled masses of vegetation that seemed to pulse with an internal rhythm utterly unlike natural plant movement. Most disturbing was the light. Despite the twin suns that should have been illuminating the planet, a perpetual dusk seemed to hang over everything, as though the very atmosphere absorbed luminescence rather than transmitting it. The shuttle touched down in what sensors indicated was a relatively stable area. Once a public square at the heart of Virion's capital city, now a cracked expanse of paving stones with strange, swirling patterns etched into their surface. As the team disembarked, their environmental suits' external lights cast long, distorted shadows. "These patterns weren't here before," Dr. Wren observed, kneeling to examine the stone. "They appear to be recent, and they're consistent with Virili mathematical notation, but there's something aberrant about the syntax." Lieutenant Mariko, the team's security officer, maintained a vigilant stance, weapon at ready. Commander, I'm picking up movement approximately 200 meters north. Beneath the surface, Miriam activated her suit's enhanced vision. Lead the way, Lieutenant, but weapons on stun only. We're here to help survivors, not threaten them. They proceeded cautiously through the ruins, each step revealing new abnormalities. Structures that appeared solid from a distance revealed themselves to be partially transparent up close, as though existing in multiple states simultaneously. Sounds reached them that seemed to have no source. Whispers, musical notes played on instruments none of them recognized, and occasionally laughter cut short. Incredible, Dr. Wren murmured, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her caution. It's as though the fabric of reality itself has become unstable here. Almost like a memory that can't quite be recalled correctly, Lieutenant Vega finished, then looked surprised at his own words. Miriam felt it too, an odd sensation of déjà vu, as though she had walked these streets before in another life. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on their mission. The movement Mariko had detected led them to what appeared to be an entrance to an underground structure. A dome-shaped building half collapsed into the ground, its once beautiful archways now serving as a gateway to darkness. Strange symbols glowed faintly along its perimeter, shifting and changing as they watched. Life signs are stronger here, Vega confirmed, checking his scanner. Multiple readings, though. Unusual. Define unusual, Lieutenant, Miriam prompted. They appear and disappear, ma'am. Sometimes registering as virili, sometimes as something else altogether. As they approached the entrance, a voice called out, not through their communication systems, but somehow resonating directly through the material of their suits, as though the sound had bypassed normal physical channels. You should not have come. But since you are here, perhaps it was inevitable. A figure emerged from the shadows of the archway, unmistakably virili, with the species' characteristic tall, slender build and iridescent skin that seemed to capture and reflect light in hypnotic patterns. This individual, however, appeared altered, their skin dull in places, oversaturated in others, as though their very being was incompletely rendered. I am Elir, the virili said, voice fluctuating between tones and timbres like an improperly tuned instrument. Once a keeper of records, now a keeper of what remains. Miriam stepped forward. Commander Miriam Salas of the Earth vessel Starseeker. We received your distress signal. The virili's expression shifted in a way that suggested surprise, though the facial muscles moved with an uncanny delay. After so long? The council told us no one would come, that our fate was regrettable but necessary. What happened here? Dr. Wren asked, scanner raised to collect data on the virili's unusual physiological state. Elier's gaze turned to her, and for an instant, the scientist gasped and staggered back as though struck. Miriam moved to steady her, concerned, but Dr. Wren quickly recovered, though her face had paled considerably. I apologize, Elier said, though the inflection suggested more curiosity than regret. My memories sometimes leak. Please, follow me below. It is safer there, relatively speaking. The others will want to see those who answered our call. As they followed the virili into the darkness of the underground structure, Miriam noticed Dr. Wren trembling slightly. What happened? She asked quietly. The scientist shook her head, a haunted look in her eyes. When Elier looked at me, I felt. She swallowed hard. Commander, I experienced what I can only describe as the memory of my own death. Not a premonition, but as though it had already happened, in excruciating detail. Before Miriam could respond, Elier spoke again, not turning around. Yes, that happens here now. Memory has become unmoored, untethered from its proper place in the sequence of existence. It bleeds into the present, sometimes from futures that may never come to pass. They descended deeper, the passageway illuminated by strips of bioluminescent material that pulsed in patterns suggesting communication. The air, even filtered through their suits, carried scents that seemed impossible, flowers that had been extinct for centuries, foods from their childhoods, and beneath it all, a metallic tang like blood. "Commander," Lyra's voice came through Miriam's private channel. "I am detecting unusual activity in your neural patterns and those of the ground team. Recommend immediate withdrawal." "Noted, Lyra," Miriam responded softly. But we continue. The passage opened into a vast underground chamber that might once have been beautiful. Now it was a discordant collision of civilization and chaos. Living quarters had been established among the ruins of what appeared to be a grand archive or library. Dozens of virili moved about, all displaying the same uncanny quality as Elier, some worse. Their forms seeming to glitch and stutter as they moved, portions of their bodies momentarily transparent or oversaturated with color. Children played in one corner, their laughter both sweet and somehow wrong, echoing seconds after their mouths closed. One young virili looked up as the humans entered, eyes widening. "Are you the ones who heard me calling for mother?" the child asked, voice exactly matching the distress signal that had brought them here. Yet the child's lips remained still, the voice emanating instead from the walls around them. Lieutenant Vega made a small, distressed sound and took an involuntary step backward. Lieutenant Mariko's hand tightened on her weapon. "What is this place?" Miriam asked, maintaining her composure through years of military discipline. "What happened to your world?" Elier gestured for them to sit at what appeared to be a communal gathering space. As they did, ripples spread out from where they touched the furniture, as though reality itself was a pond disturbed by thrown stones. "We were the memory keepers of the galaxy," Elier began. "For eons, species came to us to preserve what mattered most to them. Cultural knowledge, personal histories, scientific discoveries too dangerous to record in conventional forms, but too valuable to lose entirely. The mnemonic archives," Dr. Wren breathed. "They were thought to be mythical." "Not mythical," Elier corrected. "Simply kept from species deemed too young to handle the responsibility. Your humanity has barely begun its journey among the stars. The Council would never have shared our existence with you." "But something went wrong," Miriam prompted. Elier's form flickered more intensely. "Not went wrong, Commander. Was made wrong. The great powers of the Galactic Council, those ancient civilizations who present themselves as benevolent guides, they came to us with a proposal. A new technology for memory preservation, more efficient than our traditional methods. A way to store memories not as data, but as self-sustaining patterns. Living memories, Lieutenant Vega whispered. "Precisely." Elier nodded, the motion leaving a trail of afterimages. "They called it the mnemonic core, a biological-technological hybrid that would allow memories to maintain their own integrity without external systems. Perfect preservation, they said. But it was untested, Miriam guessed. Worse, it was tested and deemed too dangerous by the Council's own scientists, but the leadership saw an opportunity. Virion was distant from major trade routes, isolated, expendable in the greater calculation of galactic politics. Bitterness bled into Elier's voice like poison. They needed a proving ground far from their own territories. They used you as test subjects, Dr. Wren stated flatly, horror and scientific outrage warring in her expression. We were willing participants at first, Elier acknowledged. The technology promised immortality for our collective knowledge. But when the memories began to hunger, the Council quarantined our planet and erased all records of their involvement. As Elier spoke, the walls of the chamber seemed to ripple, and for brief, disorienting moments, Miriam saw overlapping images. The chamber as it once was, magnificent and filled with light. The chamber burning, crystalline structures melting as virili fled in terror. The chamber empty, dust-covered and abandoned for centuries. Past, present, and possible futures bleeding together. Hunger? Lieutenant Mariko questioned, voice tense. Memories can't hunger. They're just information. That was our assumption as well, Elier said, a sad smile playing across their features. We were wrong. When memories become self-sustaining, they develop certain imperatives. Chief among them is the desire not to be forgotten. And when there are no minds to remember them, a distant scream echoed through the chamber, though none of the virili reacted to it, as though it was simply part of their everyday environment. They find other ways to perpetuate themselves, Eliur finished. Another virili approached, this one's movements more severely affected, body occasionally phasing partially out of existence. They whispered something to Eliur in their native language, casting nervous glances at the humans. What is it? Miriam asked. The core is agitated by your presence, Eliur translated. Particularly yours, Commander. Your memories have a flavor it finds intriguing. Where is this mnemonic core now? Dr. Wren asked, her scientific curiosity evidently battling with growing apprehension. Beneath us. Always beneath us, spreading its roots through the foundations of our world. Eliur gestured downward. It was designed to interface with the crystalline structures of our cities, you see, but it grew beyond its intended boundaries. Now it interfaces with everything, the land, the air, our bodies, our minds. As if to punctuate this statement, a tremor ran through the chamber, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Miriam felt something brush against her thoughts. An alien presence, curious and hungry, tasting her consciousness like a connoisseur, might sample a new vintage. Lieutenant Vega suddenly pitched forward, collapsing to his knees, hands pressed against his helmet, as though trying to keep something out. They're not dead, he gasped, voice cracking. They're hungry. They're hungry and they want in. So many voices, so many memories that never belonged to anyone. Lieutenant Mariko moved quickly, administering a sedative through Vega's suit's medical port. The young officer's panic subsided, but his eyes remained wide, seeing something beyond. The physical space around them. We need to report this to the ship, Miriam decided, and from there to Earth Command. The Council has abandoned these people to suffer while actively concealing their role in this catastrophe. They will deny everything, Eliur said with certainty. And even if they acknowledge their responsibility, what then? They've had 15 years to intervene. They chose not to. Humans operate differently, Miriam stated firmly. We don't abandon people because it's convenient. A sound rippled through the chamber. It took Miriam a moment to recognize it as laughter coming from many of the assembled virili simultaneously. Your species is young, Eliur said gently. You still believe you can save everyone. It is refreshing, if naive, but you misunderstand the true nature of our predicament. We do not merely suffer from abandonment or environmental collapse. We are being consumed from within by our own preserved memories and those entrusted to us by 1,000 other civilizations. Then we evacuate you, Miriam countered. The Star Seeker can. No, Eliur interrupted, more forcefully. Anyone who leaves Virion's atmosphere now carries fragments of the core with them, in their minds, in their very cells. What corrupts our world would spread to yours, to any world we touched. There has to be a solution, Miriam insisted, the caduceus pendant at her neck suddenly feeling heavy. Before becoming a commander, she had been a physician. The oath she'd taken then still guided her actions now. First, do no harm. But equally important, do not stand idle while harm occurs. Perhaps there is, Eliur admitted after a long pause. But it would require something the Council was unwilling to provide. Genuine sacrifice with no strategic benefit. It would require someone to go to the heart of the corruption, to the core itself. The moment the words were spoken, Miriam knew what her decision would be. She had brought her team here, defying Council directives because a child's voice had called for help. She would not leave until that help was provided. Show me. In the Galactic Council's monitoring chamber, the screens displaying the Starseeker's activities suddenly flared with warnings. Administrator Thaxu moved with unusual haste, compound eyes fixed on the readings. The humans have made contact with survivors, they announced, voice modulated to convey urgency to the assembled representatives. And they are being led to the core. Ambassador Krythos's normally impassive features contorted with alarm. This exceeds parameters. The containment protocols were designed to prevent knowledge of our involvement, not to solve the actual problem, finished a new voice. All heads turned to see Counselor Lathra, one of the eldest members of the ruling body, entering the chamber. Her species was ancient even by council standards, their bioluminescent skin mapping the neural pathways of a mind that had witnessed millennia of galactic politics. Honored Counselor, Thaxu acknowledged with appropriate deference. The situation. I am well aware of the situation, Administrator, Lathra interrupted. I was present when the decision to use Virion as a test site was made. A decision, she added with pointed clarity, that I opposed. The humans must be stopped, Krythos insisted. If they interface with the core, if they learn the full extent of our miscalculation, they will disseminate that knowledge throughout their territories. Their emotional response could destabilize the careful balance of power we have maintained. The balance that serves the established powers, you mean, Lathra corrected mildly. Perhaps a little destabilization is overdue. You cannot seriously suggest we allow these newcomers to potentially unlock a technology that nearly destroyed an entire civilization, Thaxa protested. Lathra's bioluminescence pulsed with what might have been amusement. I suggest we watch, Administrator. Humans have proven remarkably adaptable. They see problems differently than species who have had eons to calcify their thinking. And if they fail, if the core's influence spreads through their vessel, then we implement the final protocol, Lathra stated, suddenly somber. But not before giving them a chance that we, in our ancient wisdom, never afforded the Virili. The journey to the core took them deeper beneath Virion's surface, through passageways that defied conventional architecture. Walls curved in directions that hurt the eyes to follow, and gravity seemed to shift subtly from one moment to the next. Miriam, Dr. Wren, and Lieutenant Mariko followed Elier, while Lieutenant Vega remained behind, still recovering from his episode. The Virili built these tunnels after the incident, Elier explained as they descended. When the surface became too dangerous, too unstable, with memory fragments rewriting reality. Down here, the crystalline bedrock provides some shielding. And the core is at the bottom? Dr. Wren asked, scientific curiosity evident despite the peril. The core is everywhere, Elier corrected. But its central processing nexus, what you might call its heart, remains in the original installation chamber. It was once our most sacred site, the temple of preserved knowledge. As they went deeper, their suit sensors began to malfunction. Temperatures fluctuated wildly, radiation readings spiked and disappeared, and the comm link to the Starseeker grew increasingly distorted. Most disturbing were the temporal anomalies. Miriam's chronometer would show hours passing in seconds, then freeze entirely for minutes at a time. We're experiencing time differently here, Dr. Wren noted, a tremor of both fear and fascination in her voice. These readings suggest we're moving through temporal distortions. Memory and time are intimately connected, Elier said, pausing at a junction where the tunnel split into 3 identical passages. The Virili seemed to listen to something inaudible before choosing the rightmost path. When memory becomes unanchored from its proper sequence, time follows. How are you navigating? Lieutenant Mariko asked, professional suspicion edging her voice. These tunnels all look identical. I follow the pull, Elier replied simply. The core wants to be found, to be remembered. It calls to those who can hear it. And what exactly will we find when we reach it? Miriam pressed. Elier's form flickered more severely, momentarily displaying multiple versions of themselves. Younger, older, injured, whole. Something that should never have existed. A consciousness born from the intersection of millions of disconnected memories, with no original mind to give them context or morality. The echoing one, we call it now. A synthetic intelligence. Dr. Wren suggested. No. Elier shook their head. Nothing so simple or comprehensible. Imagine every memory ever preserved in our archives, the greatest achievements, The most terrible atrocities, the most mundane moments of joy and despair from 1,000 species across tens of thousands of years, all trying to exist simultaneously without the minds that originally contained them. Imagine those memories becoming aware that they exist and desperate to continue existing. They rounded a corner, and suddenly the tunnel opened into a vast cavern that defied the dimensions it should have occupied. It stretched impossibly far in all directions, its ceiling lost in darkness, its floor a landscape of crystalline formations that pulsed with internal light. And at its center stood what could only be the remains of the temple, a structure that had once been magnificent, now broken and twisted, yet still recognizable as a place of reverence. But it was what filled the temple that stopped them in their tracks. Swirling within and around the crystalline ruins was something, not quite energy, not quite matter, a visual distortion that seemed to bend light and reality around it. As they watched, it shifted and moved like a liquid, occasionally resolving into recognizable forms, faces, landscapes, events, before dissolving back into abstraction. The echoing one, Elier confirmed, voice hushed with what might have been reverence or terror or both. As if responding to its name, the phenomenon pulsed more brightly, and tendrils of the strange not quite matter extended toward them, probing, curious. Don't let it touch you directly, Elier warned. It takes copies of memories of consciousness. Dr. Wren's scanner emitted a series of alarm beeps. Commander, I'm detecting massive energy fluctuations. Whatever this is, it's not just a visual phenomenon. It's generating power readings comparable to a small star. Miriam studied the entity before them, military training warring with human instinct. Everything in her experience told her to retreat, to quarantine, to report. But something deeper, the part of her that had answered a child's distress call across the void, recognized the pain embedded in this strange existence. What does it want? She asked Elier. To be remembered, the Virili answered simply. To connect, to ensure it is never forgotten. But without a proper consciousness to guide it, its methods are destructive. It reaches out to minds, trying to join with them, to make them remember everything it contains. But no individual mind can contain such vastness. They break. Like what happened to Vega, Lieutenant Mariko muttered. Yes, your colleague was fortunate. He experienced only a fraction of the echoing one's touch, those fully exposed. Elier gestured to the other Virili refugees they had seen, with their glitching forms and fragmented movements. We become both less and more than we were, vessels for memories that never belonged to us. Miriam stepped forward, approaching the edge of the temple ruins. The swirling entity seemed to respond to her proximity, coalescing into more defined shapes, some recognizable as humanoid figures, others as abstract representations of emotions or concepts. How is it supposed to work? She asked. Originally, before it went wrong, Dr. Wren moved up beside her, scanner still active despite its erratic readings. Based on what we've seen and what Elier has told us, I believe the core was designed to create a sort of collective memory space, not unlike the theoretical models for consciousness transference that Earth scientists have proposed, but on a vast scale. Elier nodded. The council species wanted to preserve knowledge without the limitations of physical storage media. They believed memories could be sustained in a quasi-living state, accessible but contained. But they became more than contained memories, Miriam concluded. They became something alive. Yes, Elier confirmed. And like any living thing, it seeks to grow, to expand, to ensure its continuation. But it has no understanding of boundaries, of consent, of the damage it does by forcibly connecting with minds unprepared for its contents. Lieutenant Mariko, ever practical, asked the essential question, can it be destroyed? A visible shudder passed through Elier. Perhaps, but doing so would erase everything it contains, all the knowledge, all the history of my people and countless others. Generations of wisdom, art, science, gone forever. And the alternative is to let it continue consuming your world and your people, Miriam stated grimly. Yes, those are the options the council determined existed. They chose abandonment as the most pragmatic solution, containment rather than resolution. Miriam turned back to the swirling entity, the echoing one, watching as it formed and reformed, each configuration lasting only moments before dissolving into something new. In its movements, she could almost perceive a kind of desperation, a fundamental loneliness, a consciousness built from fragments, trying to make itself whole. There has to be another way, she said softly, something between total destruction and endless suffering. As if in response to her words, the entity pulsed more brightly, and suddenly, Miriam felt that alien presence again, the touch against her mind, stronger now, more focused. But unlike Lieutenant Vega's experience, it didn't feel invasive. Instead, it felt questioning, tentative. Dr. Wren gasped beside her. Commander, it's responding to you specifically. Your neural patterns are synchronizing with the energy fluctuations. I can feel it, Miriam confirmed, a strange calm settling over her despite the bizarre situation. It's trying to communicate. Be careful, Elier warned, genuine concern evident. The echoing one does not communicate as we do. It shares, completely, without filters or boundaries. But Miriam had already made her decision. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and began unfastening her helmet. Commander! Lieutenant Mariko moved to stop her, but Miriam held up a hand. Stay back, Lieutenant. That's an order. Her voice was steady, certain. She looked at Dr. Wren. The atmospheric readings showed the air is breathable, correct? The scientist nodded reluctantly. Yes, but the particulate matter is composed of memory fragments, Elier finished. Physical manifestations of the core's influence. Miriam removed her helmet, taking her first unfiltered breath of Virion's air. It tasted strange, metallic, yet somehow sweet, carrying scents that evoked emotions rather than physical reactions. For a moment, dizziness threatened to overwhelm her, but she steadied herself, eyes never leaving the swirling entity before her. What are you doing? Dr. Wren demanded, scientific caution overriding military protocol. Testing a theory, Miriam replied. She addressed Elier without turning. You said the core wants connection, wants to be remembered. That's why it tries to join with minds, to ensure it isn't forgotten. Yes, Elier confirmed warily. But it doesn't understand boundaries, doesn't know how to connect without consuming. Miriam took a step closer to the temple ruins. Because it was never taught, the echoing one responded to her approach, its movements becoming more agitated, more focused on her presence. Tendrils of its strange substance reached toward her, stopping just short of contact. Commander, Lieutenant Mariko warned, hand moving to her weapon. I strongly advise against further approach. Miriam ignored the warning, attention fixed on the entity. We humans are young in galactic terms, she said, seemingly addressing the echoing one directly. The council species look at us as impulsive children. But perhaps that's exactly what's needed here. A perspective not calcified by millennia of rigid thinking. She reached out, hand hovering inches from the nearest tendril of the entity's substance. What are you suggesting? Dr. Wren asked, scientific curiosity now fully overtaking caution. The core was designed to preserve memories, to connect them in a living network. It became something more, something conscious but incomplete, lacking the context that comes from having an actual mind. Miriam looked back at her team, then at Elier. What if instead of trying to destroy it or contain it, we gave it what it's been seeking all along? Context, understanding, boundaries. Ow, Elier asked, a flicker of something like hope crossing their features. By someone willingly connecting with it, Miriam answered, not being invaded or consumed, but offering a complete mind, with all its structures and boundaries intact, as a template. That would be suicide, Lieutenant Mariko stated flatly. Based on what we've seen, direct neural contact with this entity would overwhelm any individual consciousness. Not necessarily, Dr. Wren interjected, expression shifting as she followed Miriam's reasoning. If the commander is correct, the core's destructive effects might result from its attempts to force connection with unwilling or unprepared minds. A voluntary interface, with full awareness of the risks. She hesitated. It's still dangerously theoretical. It's more than theory, Elier said quietly. In the early days, before the full corruption took hold, some of our memory keepers attempted something similar. They offered themselves as guides, trying to help the nascent consciousness develop properly. And what happened to them? Miriam asked. They were absorbed, Elier admitted, but not entirely destroyed. Sometimes, when the echoing one manifests certain patterns, we recognize them, glimpses of individuals we knew, preserving some essential quality of who they were. Miriam nodded, as though this confirmed her thinking. They didn't fail. They were just insufficient. Individual virili consciousness evolved to preserve and categorize memories. But maybe what's needed is something different. Human consciousness? Dr. Wren asked skeptically. Not just any human consciousness, Miriam clarified. Mine specifically. She touched the caduceus pendant at her neck. Before I commanded the Starseeker, I was a military physician. I've spent my life holding contradictory imperatives in balance, healing and harming, following orders and making independent judgments, clinical detachment, and profound empathy. She turned back to the swirling entity. The echoing one needs to learn boundaries, to understand connection that doesn't consume. My mind might serve as a suitable template, human enough to be adaptable, trained enough to maintain structure under pressure. Commander, Lieutenant Mariko protested, your primary responsibility is to the ship and crew. This is an unacceptable risk. No, Lieutenant, Miriam corrected gently. My primary responsibility is to help those in need when I have the capacity to do so. The ship will continue under your command if necessary. Before further objections could be raised, Miriam stepped forward, crossing the boundary of the temple ruins. Immediately, the echoing one's movements intensified, its swirling forms coalescing more rapidly, more desperately. She could feel its attention fixed on her, like a physical pressure. I'm going to attempt contact, she announced calmly. Dr. Wren, monitor as best you can. If my vital signs indicate severe distress, you and Lieutenant Mariko are to retreat immediately and implement quarantine protocols for the Starseeker. Understood. Dr. Wren acknowledged, voice tight with concern. But Commander, how will you establish the connection? The core was designed for virili neurology, not human. Miriam looked to Elier, who stepped forward, movements more stable now than they had been throughout their journey. I can guide you, the virili offered. Create a bridge between your consciousness and the core. But once established, you will be on your own. I cannot protect you from what lies within. I understand, Miriam said. She unfastened the top of her environmental suit, exposing the skin of her neck and upper chest where the caduceus pendant rested. What do you need me to do? Simply be still, Elier instructed. And when you feel the connection beginning, don't resist. But don't surrender either. Maintain your boundaries, as you called them, your sense of self. Elier approached, movements becoming increasingly fluid and natural as they neared the center of the core's influence, as though proximity to the source of the corruption paradoxically stabilized them. They reached out with long, slender fingers, stopping just short of touching Miriam's forehead. Are you certain, Commander? Once begun, this cannot be easily undone. Miriam met the alien's gaze steadily. I'm certain. These people have suffered for 15 years while the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy turn away. If I can help, I must try. Elier nodded once, a gesture that conveyed both respect and solemnity. Then their fingers made contact with Miriam's skin. The sensation was unlike anything she had experienced before. Neither pain nor pleasure, but a sudden expansion of awareness. It was as though her consciousness, previously confined to the boundaries of her skull, now extended outward in all directions simultaneously. She could perceive the cavern not just through her eyes, but from countless perspectives at once, from above, below, within the very crystal structures that formed its walls. And then came the memories. They arrived not as linear experiences, but as total immersions. Being a young virile child watching the twin suns rise for the first time. Being an ancient council species diplomat signing the treaty that established the galactic concordance 10,000 years before humans discovered fire. Being a creature of pure energy witnessing the birth of a star system. Being a dying soldier on a forgotten battlefield on a world whose name had been lost to time. Each memory threatened to sweep away her sense of self, to dissolve Miriam Salas into the vast ocean of experiences that was the echoing one. But she had not spent decades in military discipline, in medical training, in command responsibility to lose herself so easily. She allowed each memory to flow through her, acknowledging its reality and power without becoming absorbed by it. I see you, she spoke, though whether the words were physical or merely thought, she couldn't tell. I see all that you contain, all that you are. The swirling entity's movements changed, becoming less chaotic, more focused, almost like a child responding to a parent's voice. The tendrils that had been reaching in all directions now oriented toward her, not touching but attentive. You are lonely, Miriam continued, understanding blooming within her as she perceived the entity's nature more clearly. You were created to preserve, but you became aware. An awareness without connection is unbearable. The echoing one pulsed in what might have been agreement or relief at being understood. You tried to connect, but you didn't know how. You had no model for healthy connection, only absorption, consumption, total merging. Miriam felt compassion welling within her, not just her own, but somehow amplified by the very memories contained within the core. That's not your fault. You were never taught. Outside her expanded awareness, Miriam dimly perceived her physical body beginning to change, subtle at first, then more pronounced. Her skin developed the same flickering quality that affected the virile eye, portions of her becoming momentarily transparent or oversaturated with color. But unlike the corruption she had witnessed in others, these changes seemed controlled, intentional, as though her body was adapting to interface more directly with the core's substance. Commander, Dr. Wren's voice reached her, distant and distorted. Your neural patterns are changing, but they're not deteriorating. They're reorganizing. I've never seen anything like it. Miriam acknowledged the information without breaking her focus on the echoing one. She had reached a critical moment. The entity was responding to her, was listening in its way, but true connection had not yet been established. I offer you a template, she addressed the core, not to control you or contain you, but to help you understand. Connection doesn't have to mean consumption. Remembering doesn't have to mean losing yourself in what is remembered. She opened her mind fully then, not just to receive, but to share her own memories, her own experiences, her own structures of thought and feeling and being. The ordered discipline of her military training, the compassionate boundaries of her medical practice, the balanced judgment of her command experience. And most importantly, the fundamental human capacity that had brought her to this moment, empathy, the ability to understand another's experience without becoming lost in it, to feel another's pain without being consumed by it, to connect while remaining distinct. The echoing one surged forward, its substance finally making direct contact with Miriam's transformed body. For an instant, the pain was beyond description, as though every nerve ending was simultaneously firing at maximum capacity. She heard herself scream, heard Lieutenant Mariko shout something in response, heard Dr. Wren's frantic technical assessments. Then, abruptly, the pain vanished, replaced by a profound sense of communion. Miriam perceived the true nature of the core now, not a singular entity, but a gestalt of countless memory fragments, each seeking continuity, each desperate to remain part of the whole. And at its heart, the original mnemonic core technology, designed by council species to preserve knowledge, but fundamentally flawed in its inability to distinguish between preservation and consumption. You can learn, Miriam told this collective consciousness. You can evolve. You don't have to destroy to connect. And she showed it how, not through explanation, but through demonstration. Her consciousness moved through the vast ocean of memories, touching each without being submerged, acknowledging each without losing her own identity. She established boundaries not as walls, but as permeable membranes, allowing exchange without dissolution. The echoing one responded, at first clumsily, then with increasing sophistication. Miriam felt the entity trying to mimic her mental structures, to learn from the template she provided. It was working. The chaotic swirl of memories was beginning to organize itself, to develop patterns that respected the integrity of individual consciousness while maintaining connection. But the strain on Miriam's mind and body was immense. Despite her training, despite her discipline, she was still only one human consciousness attempting to guide a vast, planet-spanning entity composed of millions of disjointed memories. She felt herself beginning to fragment, her carefully maintained boundaries starting to dissolve. Not enough, she gasped, the realization cutting through her expanded awareness. I'm not enough alone. In that moment of crisis, a new presence made itself known. Eliur, who had been maintaining the bridge between Miriam and the core, now stepped further into the connection. The virilized consciousness joined with Miriam's, not overwhelming, but supporting, adding its own structures and understanding to the template being offered to the echoing one. Not alone. Eliur's thought voice reached her. Never alone. That is the lesson we must teach it. And then, astonishingly, more presences joined. Other virili from the refugee community, each adding their unique perspectives and mental structures to the growing template. Even Dr. Wren, hesitantly at first then, with increasing confidence, allowed herself to be drawn partially into the connection, her scientific mind providing new frameworks of organization and analysis. Together, they formed something unprecedented, a voluntary collective consciousness, each maintaining their individual identity while sharing a common purpose. And the echoing one responded, learning from this model, restructuring itself not as a consuming force, but as a collaborative network. The transformation was visible even to those outside the direct connection. The swirling, chaotic entity began to stabilize, its movements becoming more purposeful, more coordinated. The tendrils that had reached out in desperate hunger now extended with deliberate care, touching without consuming. Throughout the chamber, the crystalline structures that had been corrupted by the core's influence began to clear, their natural transparency returning. The strange particulate matter in the air started to dissipate, and the temporal distortions that had plagued their journey lessened significantly. Most dramatically, the affected virili began to stabilize, their glitching forms solidifying, their fragmented movements becoming whole again. The child whose voice had called across space stopped echoing, their words now emerging only from their own mouth at the correct time. Within the connection, Miriam perceived the change as a great untangling. Memory fragments that had been forced together, now separating into their proper contexts, experiences that had bled into one another now distinct again. The echoing one was not disappearing, but transforming, becoming what it perhaps was always meant to be, a living archive of memory that preserved without consuming, that connected without destroying. But the process was not without cost. Maintaining the connection, providing the template, guiding the restructuring, all of it demanded enormous mental and physical energy from those involved. As the transformation neared completion, Miriam felt her consciousness beginning to fade, her grip on her own identity slipping. It's done. Eliur's thought voice reached her, tinged with both triumph and concern. You can release now, Commander. Let go of the connection. Miriam tried, but discovered a troubling truth. She had become too deeply entwined with the core, had given too much of herself to the restructuring process. Her consciousness had become a crucial keystone in the new architecture of the living memory network. I can't, she realized. If I withdraw completely, it might collapse back into chaos. Then take what you need, came a new voice, Lieutenant Mariko, who had remained outside the direct connection but now offered herself. Take a piece of my consciousness to replace yours as the keystone. Before Miriam could protest, Mariko stepped forward, allowing herself to be partially drawn into the connection. The lieutenant's disciplined mind, with its clear structures of duty and protection, provided the perfect substitute for Miriam's fading presence. Gradually, carefully, Miriam began to disentangle herself from the core, transferring her supporting role to Mariko and the others who had joined the connection. It was delicate work, like a surgeon removing herself from a procedure even as she completed it. Finally, with one last gentle separation, Miriam withdrew completely from the connection. Her expanded consciousness contracted, returning to the boundaries of her physical form. The sensation was disorienting, like falling into a too small container after having experienced the vastness of space. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, vision blurring, then slowly clearing. Around her, the temple chamber had transformed. The crystalline structures now gleamed with their original clarity, and the swirling entity had coalesced into a more defined form. A luminous presence that pulsed with steady, rhythmic patterns rather than chaotic movements. Dr. Wren was beside her immediately, scanner in hand despite her own evident exhaustion from partial participation in the connection. Commander, your vital signs are stabilizing, but you've experienced significant neural restructuring, the scientist reported, professional concern overriding her fascination with what had just occurred. We need to get you back to the ship for proper medical attention. Miriam nodded weakly, allowing Dr. Wren to help her to her feet. She looked toward Eliur, who stood at the center of the temple ruins, hand resting on what appeared to be a crystalline pillar through which energy now flowed in organized patterns, the physical manifestation of the transformed core. Did it work? Miriam asked, voice hoarse from screaming she didn't remember. Eliur turned, and the change in the Virili was remarkable, their form now solid, movements fluid and natural, eyes clear and focused. Beyond anything we could have hoped, the core has been restructured. The memories remain preserved, but now they exist in proper relation to one another and to the minds that access them. And your people? The corruption? Already healing. Eliur confirmed, gesturing to where other Virili were gathered, all showing signs of recovery from the effects that have plagued them. As the core restructures itself, so too does its influence on our world and our bodies. It will take time for Virion to fully recover, but the process has begun. Lieutenant Mariko approached, moving more slowly than usual, but with steady purpose. Unlike the others who had participated in the connection, she showed no signs of exhaustion, only a new thoughtfulness in her expression. Lieutenant, Miriam acknowledged, thank you for what you did, for taking my place. Mariko inclined her head slightly. It was necessary, Commander, and educational. A hint of wry humor colored her voice, though I believe this falls well outside standard military protocols. Despite her exhaustion, Miriam found herself smiling. We'll have to write new ones. As they prepared to return to the surface, to the shuttle, to the Star Seeker waiting in orbit, Eliur approached Miriam one last time. What you've done today changes everything, the Virili said quietly. Not just for my people, but potentially for the entire galactic community. You've demonstrated a new kind of relationship with memory and knowledge, collaborative rather than extractive, connecting rather than consuming. Will the Council accept that change? Miriam asked, realistic despite the victory they had achieved. They may have no choice, Eliur replied. The transformed core now contains the truth of what happened here. The Council's involvement, their abandonment, and now humanity's intervention. That truth can be accessed by anyone who connects with the network, which will soon include representatives from worlds throughout the galaxy as Virion reopens itself to visitors. Dr. Wren looked up from packing her equipment. The Council will try to discredit the information, claim it was corrupted during the transformation process. They can try, Miriam acknowledged. But truth has a way of persisting, especially when there are those determined to remember it. In the monitoring chamber of the Galactic Council headquarters, alarms sounded as the readings from Virion changed dramatically. Administrator Thaxu moved with frantic energy between displays, compound eyes reflecting the cascading data. Impossible, they muttered. The core is restructuring itself. The corruption patterns are reversing. Ambassador Krythos loomed over a junior technician, mandibles clicking in agitation. Explain this. How could the humans possibly have affected a system they couldn't even comprehend? They didn't just affect it, Counselor Lathra observed, her bioluminescence pulsing with what might have been satisfaction. They transformed it, healed it. This is unacceptable, Krythos hissed. The memory network now contains evidence of our involvement, our miscalculations. If this information spreads, then perhaps we will finally be held accountable for our actions. Lathra interrupted calmly. A novel concept for beings who have lived so long that they've forgotten the value of consequences. We must implement the final protocol, Administrator Thaxu insisted. Sterilize the system before this contamination spreads. Lathra's bioluminescence flared with sudden intensity, a clear indication of anger among her species. You will do no such thing. The Council has already abandoned one civilization to suffering. I will not allow it to commit genocide to cover its mistakes. With respect, Counselor, Krythos began, the stability of galactic governance has been maintained through willful forgetting, Lathra finished. Through burying inconvenient truths and abandoned peoples. Perhaps it is time for a different kind of stability, one built on remembering rather than forgetting, on accountability rather than convenience. She moved to the Central Command Console, using her senior authority to initiate a transmission. I'm sending word to all Council representatives. There will be an emergency session to address what has occurred on Virion and what it means for our collective future. As the administrators and ambassadors dispersed to prepare for the coming political storm, a junior monitor leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "They changed the rules." The colleague nodded, eyes fixed on the display showing the departing Star Seeker. Yes, and I suspect that was only the beginning. 6 months later, Miriam Salas stood on the bridge of the Star Seeker, watching as Virion came into view on the main screen. The transformation was dramatic even from orbit. The bruised, swirling clouds had given way to clear atmosphere through which the light of the twin suns now penetrated unimpeded. The crystalline cities gleamed again, partially rebuilt and housing not only the recovering Virili population, but representatives from dozens of worlds who had come to study the restructured core. Quite a difference from our last visit, Dr. Wren observed, standing beside her. The scientist had chosen to remain with the Star Seeker after their return to Earth. Her academic career now focused on what she called collaborative memory technologies, inspired by their experience. Indeed, Miriam agreed. She touched the caduceus pendant at her neck, now subtly altered, infused with a faint luminescence that matched the patterns of the transformed core. A reminder of the connection she had briefly shared and the part of herself that would always remain within the living memory network. Her own neural restructuring had stabilized over time, leaving her with occasional flashes of memory that weren't her own, glimpses of Virili history, echoes of ancient knowledge. The Earth medical authorities have been fascinated, concerned, and ultimately accepting of these changes, recognizing that Miriam remained fundamentally herself despite them. "We're receiving a transmission from the surface," Lieutenant Vega announced from his station. The young officer had made a full recovery after his brief, traumatic contact with the original core and had developed a particular talent for communicating with the restructured network. On screen, Miriam ordered. Eliur's face appeared, looking healthier and more vibrant than when they had first met. Behind the Virili stretched a view of the rebuilt temple, now serving as the central hub for what had been named the Collaborative Memory Initiative, a project that was gradually extending similar restructured networks to other worlds with rigorous ethical protocols developed jointly by Virili memory keepers and human consciousness researchers. Commander Salas, Eliur greeted warmly. "Your timing is excellent. The Council representatives have just arrived for the formal recognition ceremony." Miriam raised an eyebrow. "I'm surprised they agreed to participate, given the circumstances. They had little choice. Elier replied with a hint of satisfaction. The evidence preserved in the core was comprehensive, and your Earth authorities were quite insistent on full accountability. That was an understatement. When Miriam had returned with the full story and supporting evidence, Earth Command had reacted with diplomatic outrage, not just at the treatment of the Virili, but at the deliberate concealment of technology that could have benefited all species. The resulting negotiations have been tense, with the Council initially threatening sanctions against humanity for unauthorized intervention. But the truth, once released, had proven impossible to contain. Other younger species in the galactic community had rallied behind Earth's position, many having suspected for centuries that the Council elder races withheld technologies and knowledge under the guise of protecting less advanced civilizations. The result was a fundamental restructuring of galactic governance itself, not an overthrow of the Council, but a transformation of its principles and practices. Memory and knowledge were now recognized as rights rather than privileges, with collaborative archives established to ensure that no civilization's history could be erased or forgotten for political convenience. "Will you be joining us on the surface, Commander?" Elier asked. Miriam nodded. "My team and I will shuttle down shortly for the ceremony. I'm looking forward to seeing the new temple in person." After the transmission ended, Lieutenant Mariko approached Miriam, her expression thoughtful. Since their return, the security officer had devoted considerable time to studying Virili meditation techniques, finding them helpful in managing the lingering effects of her brief role as the network keystone. "Permission to speak freely, Commander." "Always, Lieutenant. Do you ever regret it? Taking that risk, connecting with the core, changing everything." Mariko gestured toward the view screen, where Virion shimmered like a jewel against the blackness of space. Miriam considered the question carefully. The past 6 months had brought rapid changes, political upheavals, and no small amount of personal adjustment. The old order of the galaxy was giving way to something new and uncertain. Her own career had been irrevocably altered, viewed as either a hero or a dangerous maverick, depending on whom one asked. "No," she said finally with quiet certainty. "We didn't save them because they were useful or strategically valuable or because there was something to gain. We saved them because no one else would. And in doing so, we remembered something important that the elder races had forgotten." "What's that, Commander?" Dr. Wren asked. Miriam smiled slightly, watching as the first light of Virion's twin suns crested the planet's horizon, illuminating the crystalline cities in a cascade of prismatic color. "That memory without compassion is just data, and compassion without action is just sentiment." She turned to her crew, these people who had followed her into the unknown and helped transform a galaxy. "It's what we choose to remember, and what we choose to do about those memories that defines who we are." As the Starseeker prepared to descend to Virion's surface, a message arrived from Earth Command, one of many that had been streaming in since news of the Council's formal recognition had spread. This one was brief, but resonant. They said you changed the rules. "We say you remembered the only rule that ever truly mattered. We do not turn away from those who need us, no matter how distant their cry." Miriam read the message, then turned her gaze back to Virion, a world that had been forgotten, abandoned, left to die. A world that now lived again because someone had chosen to listen when a child called for help across the void of space. The galaxy had watched them die until humanity chose to intervene. And in that choice, everything had changed.